Hey guys, in today's video I want to talk about tanking in tennis. And for you guys that are not familiar with this term, tanking basically refers to a player not trying, throwing a match. Now on a day like today, you can see how windy it is. This would be the perfect day to throw a match, to tank a match. Because what you're probably thinking is that when players tank, they don't feel like being on the court. They just want to go home and throw the match for that reason. But I'm here to tell you, while that does happen frequently, that is not the main driver of players tanking matches. The main reason why tennis players tank matches is to protect their ego. So there are two ways players tank matches. The first way is the obvious tank. I'm sure you're thinking right away of Bernard Tomic. He is known to have tanked matches in the past where he loses 6-0, 6-0 or 6-1, 6-1 in less than an hour, and everybody can see that he lost on purpose. Another player that has tanked matches in the past is Nick Kyrgios. But to your surprise, some of the legends of the game have tanked matches as well. For example, Andre Agassi has tanked matches in the past, and also the GOAT, Novak Djokovic, has thrown some matches way back in the day. So you're probably thinking guys like Bernard Tomic and Nick Kyrgios are tanking matches because they don't want to be out there and they hate tennis. But that is not necessarily true. Think about it this way, especially in the case of Nick Kyrgios, who has had a phenomenal 2022. If these players hate tennis so much, they would just quit and they would stop trying. In fact, Bernard Tomic is still trying to come back to the tour. If they hated tennis so much, they would quit. They would not continue to try to improve their ranking and continue to try to play tennis. There's a deeper reason, and this is the case for most players, why tanking takes place. And that deeper reason is the protection of a player's ego. Now let me explain that in a little more detail. So look, tennis is one of the most difficult sports from a mental standpoint because it's an individual sport and players are dealing with pressures that are external and internal. When we're talking about external pressures, these are things that everybody has to deal with, not just the elites. Even players like you and I have to deal with external pressures. Maybe we're playing a match and our family is watching or our friends, but even the external pressure of our opponent playing against us plays a big role when it comes to the mental game. Now, of course, at the elite level, the external pressures are much greater because there are spectators in the crowd, there are spectators on TV, they have their own fan bases, and of course now in modern times, social media adds a tremendous amount of external pressures that elite level tennis players have to deal with. Now you got to follow me very closely because I'm going to explain to you why this external pressure that players are facing plays a role why some tennis players tank matches. There's of course players that never tank. We all know that. Players like Andy Murray, Rafael Nadal, and many others never tanked a match in their life, or at least not that I'm aware of. But there are a lot of players at all levels of the game, even at the recreational level, that have tanked matches. So the external pressures that I just described are a factor when it comes to tanking, and here's how it works. The player might not necessarily be aware that this is happening, but basically the protection of the ego happens in the following way. The player will throw a match or tank a match, basically saying to the world, if I would have tried, I probably would have won. So in their mind, it's a protection of the ego. The only reason why they lost is because they didn't try. Now, whether this happens consciously or not, that's a whole nother topic, but this is what's happening internally. They're protecting their ego and basically telling to the whole world that if they would have tried, they would have played much better, and the only reason why they lost is because they didn't try. So you understand where I'm coming from? The ego is therefore being protected. They lost because they didn't try. Now, like I said before, players are not necessarily conscious that this is taking place. And sometimes things like tanking just overcomes players. They're not in full control over it. Other times they are in control over it. But whatever the case may be, tanking has the opposite effect on an elite level player. It is one of the worst things that a player can do. And let me tell you a quick story about Nick Kyrgios. So there was this beginner tennis player that I was teaching who didn't know anything about professional tennis, and he was very interested in watching tennis. He asked me what are some of the good players to follow, and I'm a big Nick Kyrgios fan, and I told him you should follow Nick Kyrgios. He's a unbelievable player. He's really entertaining to watch. So this guy started watching Nick Kyrgios and quickly became a fan. And then the Delray Beach professional tennis tournament was around the corner, and I told him that Nick Kyrgios entered. And of course, this guy, who was very wealthy, bought the most expensive ticket to the Delray Beach tournament. There's a ticket that you can buy where you're basically sitting on the court, and this guy bought this ticket for a Nick Kyrgios match and was super excited. And guess what happened? Nick Kyrgios shows up and tanks the match. Like, doesn't even try, gets booed off the court as he's walking off. And this guy was so disappointed. From that moment on, he couldn't stand Nick Kyrgios. And players don't realize the catastrophic effect that tanking has on people that are watching them play, because people are investing either their money or their time into watching tennis. And when they see somebody tank, it is absolutely the worst thing a tennis fan can see. And I can speak from experience, I don't like seeing it either. So this is something that players must realize. Their reputation gets absolutely destroyed when they tank a match and when they don't try. But you got to realize that the things that happen on the tennis court from a mental standpoint are sometimes so strong it just overcomes the players and they're not in full control over it. But the perception, of course, is that players are just brats and they hate tennis. They don't want to be out there and just throwing matches. But it's not quite that simple. When we're talking about high-level tennis in general, or even recreational tennis, where not many people are watching, maybe except friends or family, and obviously it's not broadcasted anywhere, players still tank. And now you ask yourself, well, why would they do that? As far as external pressure and protecting their ego from other people. But you got to realize that maybe they're protecting their ego from their opponent. They're tanking to the opponent, basically saying, hey, the only reason why you beat me is because I didn't try. Maybe for the parents that are watching or the friends that are watching, they're basically saying the same thing. I tanked this match. I didn't try. If I would have tried, I would have done much better. And for that reason, their ego is protected. Now here's the thing though. There's also the internal pressure that players are dealing with. And this is where sometimes tanking doesn't become so obvious. It's very subtle, where players are indeed tanking, throwing matches, losing on purpose, and nobody would ever be able to detect it because it's very subtle. All players have to do is reduce their level by 5% if they're playing against somebody of a similar level, and this will guarantee that they lose the match. And this happens very, very frequently. I've talked to many high-level players who have lost on purpose. And I'm not talking about obvious tanking. This is a subtle thing that nobody will be able to recognize. And you ask yourself, what would be the reasoning for tanking like that, where players are losing on purpose? Well, here it's more internal. It's the internal pressure that players are dealing with. And it's a lot easier to handle a loss when you lose on purpose than giving it your all, fighting hard, and then losing a heartbreaker where you were on the court for 3 hours. That hurts a lot more. In fact, it's one of the worst things that can happen to a player. It is very painful to lose a tough match like that. So a lot of players, for various reasons, will tap out. They will lose on purpose. They will make a nice score like 3-3 or 2-4, and they will avoid all this pressure. They will avoid all this pain. And also they might be protecting their ego from the inside, which doesn't have to do anything with the outside world. They might be saying to themselves, hey, I'm a great player and I might have won that match if I would have tried. And by not trying, I'm basically protecting my ego and keeping the status of the player in my own mind at the same level as it was before. And guys, I'm about to tank this video because there are 25-mile-an-hour gusts that are blowing. So I'm gonna go to the car and get a break from this wind. But hear me out. This is one of the most important videos that you can ever watch if you can admit to yourself that you have thrown matches in the past, that you have tanked matches, because simply knowing the information, why tanking takes place, will help you prevent tanking from ever happening again. And look, if you're tanking matches because you don't like tennis and you don't like being out there, there's not much I can do for you. You gotta like tennis, you gotta like the competition. If you hate tennis, you gotta find something else to do. But if you love tennis and still find yourself tanking matches, the number one factor why this is happening is your ego. You're trying to protect your ego, and simply knowing that this is the reason why you tank, whether you're obviously tanking Bernard Tomic style Or if it's more subtle, where you just kind of letting matches go and you're losing on purpose, you're reducing your level enough so you're guaranteed to lose. If this is something that you can admit to yourself, simply knowing the information that I presented in this video will help you from ever tanking another match again. All you got to do is tell yourself, I'm not going to allow my ego to protect itself. I'm going to fight till the end, and I'm not going to be afraid of the outcome of the match. The fact that tennis is an individual sport, the fact that we're out there one against one, makes the mental part of the game a very challenging one. And there's going to be certain things happening to you, whether you're conscious of it or not, they are going to make you perform a certain way. And when it comes to protecting your ego, this is something that I see happen very frequently, and it's very important to be aware of these things and to take a moment prior to a match and start thinking about some of these things before a match. Tell yourself that you are going to fight and give it 100%. Tell yourself that, hey, you could start getting these feelings inside of a match where you just want to let go and give up and let the other person win. Tell yourself that before the match, and when you're aware that these things can happen, when you're aware that these things have happened in the past, where you're honest with yourself, they're less likely to happen in the future.